The dust devil spun across Main Street like a ghost of everything Penelope Taylor had tried to forget, and when it cleared, she saw him standing there as if 20 years had never happened at all. Her breath caught in her throat, the wooden crate of flour she'd been carrying nearly slipping from her hands. Benjamin Irwin. The name echoed through her mind like a church bell, heavy and resonant with everything she'd buried in the deepest chambers of her heart. He stood outside the Marfa telegraph office in the late afternoon sun of 1885, his broad shoulders casting shadows across the boardwalk. His hat pushed back just enough that she could see those same blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for 2 decades. Penelope set the crate down with trembling hands, her pulse hammering so hard she thought the entire town of Marfa, Texas, might hear it. She was 40 years old now, a widow for the past 3 years, running the general store her late husband had left her. The lines around her eyes spoke of hard years and harder losses, but Benjamin looked at her as though she were still the 20-year-old girl who'd kissed him goodbye under a cottonwood tree in the summer of 1865. He crossed the street toward her, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step. The late afternoon heat shimmered between them, making everything feel dreamlike and impossible. When he stopped 3 feet away, she could smell leather and sage and something indefinably him. Penelope. His voice was rougher than she remembered, weathered by time and whatever he'd endured in the years between then and now. Benjamin. She barely managed to speak his name. Her hands found her apron, gripping the fabric like it might anchor her to reality. "I thought you were dead." A muscle worked in his jaw. "I thought the same about you for a long time." Around them, Marfa continued its slow afternoon rhythm. Horses stood drowsy at hitching posts. Mrs. Henderson swept her porch 3 doors down. The blacksmith's hammer rang out its steady percussion. But Penelope felt like the entire world had narrowed to just this moment, just this man who'd ridden away to fight in a war and never come back. "What are you doing here?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he was here. Marfa was his hometown too, the place they'd both grown up before the war tore everything apart. "My father died last month. Got the telegram in Montana. I came back to settle his affairs." His eyes searched her face, drinking in every detail. "I heard you married Thomas Taylor." "I did." The words felt hollow. "He passed 3 years ago. Pneumonia." Benjamin's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Penny, truly." The old nickname hit her like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories she'd worked so hard to lock away. Stolen kisses behind the schoolhouse, dancing at the harvest festival, his promise that he'd come back to her, that the war wouldn't keep him long, that they'd get married just like they'd planned. "Why didn't you come back?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "After the war ended, everyone else came home, but you just disappeared. Your father said you'd written once from California, but that was all. 20 years, Benjamin. 20 years without a word." He looked down at his boots and she saw pain flicker across his face. "Can we talk somewhere private?" "This isn't a conversation for the middle of Main Street." Penelope glanced back at her store, then at the setting sun. "Come by the house after dark. White cottage 2 blocks past the church, blue shutters. Thomas always left them blue even though I wanted green." She didn't know why she added that last detail, only that she needed him to understand that her life had continued without him, that she'd made a home with someone else even though her heart had never quite healed. Benjamin nodded slowly. "I'll be there." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Penelope standing on the boardwalk feeling like she'd been struck by lightning. She watched him disappear into the Golden Spur Saloon, then finally gathered her scattered wits enough to retrieve her flour and stumble back inside her store. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. She measured out sugar for Mrs. Chen cut fabric for the Reynolds girl who was getting married next month, and tried not to think about how Benjamin's shoulders had filled out or how his eyes still held that same intensity that had made her feel like the only woman in the world. By the time she locked up and walked home through the cooling evening air, her nerves were wound tight as barbed wire. She'd raised 2 children in this cottage, Thomas's children, good kids who'd both moved to El Paso for better opportunities. She'd built a life here that made sense, that was stable and respectable and entirely separate from the wild dreams she'd harbored as a girl. And now Benjamin was back, stirring up everything she'd tried to settle. She lit lamps throughout the house, changed from her work dress into something simpler, and tried to decide whether to make coffee or leave the kitchen cold. Finally, she put the kettle on. Whatever happened tonight, they'd need something to do with their hands. The knock came just after full dark, soft and hesitant. Penelope opened the door to find Benjamin standing there with his hat in his hands, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd seen him on the street. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He entered slowly, taking in the modest but comfortable interior. His eyes lingered on the photograph on the mantel, a formal portrait of her and Thomas taken on their 10th anniversary. "He looks like a good man," Benjamin said quietly. He was. Penelope moved toward the kitchen. "I have coffee on. Sit down." They settled at her small kitchen table, steaming cups between them. For a long moment neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt weighted with all the years they'd lost. "I was captured," Benjamin finally said. 3 months before the war ended, my unit was ambushed near Petersburg. They took us to Andersonville. Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. Everyone knew about Andersonville, the Confederate prison camp where Union soldiers had died by the thousands. "I was there until the war ended," he continued, his voice flat and distant. "When they finally released us, I was half dead from dysentery and fever. Spent 2 months in a hospital in Atlanta, delirious most of the time. By the time I was well enough to think straight, I figured months had passed. I thought you would have given me up for dead, moved on. I'd heard rumors that Marfa had a bad drought while I was gone, that families had scattered. I didn't know if you were even still here." "I wrote you letters," Penelope whispered. "Dozens of them, to every regiment address I could find. I never got them. Mail didn't exactly reach us regular at Andersonville, and after that I was moving around so much, trying to find work, trying to put myself back together." He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "I was ashamed, Penny, ashamed of what I'd become, of how weak I was. I was 23 years old and felt like an old man. I had nightmares every night. I couldn't hold a job for more than a few months before the darkness would catch up to me and I'd have to move on. I convinced myself you were better off without me." Tears streamed down Penelope's cheeks. "You should have let me make that choice. I know." His voice cracked. "I know that now. But back then, all I could think about was that you deserved someone whole, someone who could give you a good life. Not a broken-down soldier who jumped at loud noises and couldn't sleep through the night without waking up screaming." She reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was rough and calloused, marked by hard labor and harder years. "What changed? Why come back now?" "Time," he said simply. "And distance. I worked my way up to Montana, hired on with a ranch up there. Spent 15 years learning to be a whole person again. Made peace with what happened to me, found ways to live with the memories. Met a widow woman who'd lost her husband to the war, and she helped me understand that survival wasn't something to be ashamed of." He squeezed Penelope's hand gently. "We were friends, nothing more. But she made me see that I'd wasted so many years running from myself. When my father's telegram came, I realized I needed to come home, needed to face what I'd left behind. Did you ever marry?" Penelope asked, not sure she wanted to know the answer. No, came close once about 10 years ago. Woman in Wyoming, schoolteacher. But I couldn't go through with it. Kept thinking about blue eyes and a smile that lit up the whole world. He looked at her steadily. Kept thinking about you, Penny, about what might have been if I'd had more courage. The kitchen felt impossibly small and impossibly vast at the same time. Penelope could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the warmth of Benjamin's hand in hers. 20 years had changed everything and nothing. They were different people now, marked by loss and life and all the ways the world had shaped them. But underneath it all, she felt the echo of that young love, that connection that had never quite severed despite all the distance and silence. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. I mourned you for 5 years before I let Thomas court me, built a whole life after you. And now you're here and I feel like I'm 20 years old again and it terrifies me. Benjamin lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'm not asking you to turn your life upside down, Penny. I don't have any right to ask you for anything. I just needed you to know the truth, needed you to understand why I disappeared. How long are you staying in Marfa? However long it takes to sell my father's property and settle everything. A month, maybe 2. And then you'll go back to Montana. He was quiet for a moment. I haven't decided. The ranch sold last year when the owner passed. I've got enough money saved to make a fresh start wherever I want. Montana feels empty now. Been thinking maybe it's time to find a place that feels like home again. Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest, dangerous and sweet. You should know that if you stay, people will talk. Everyone remembers we were engaged before you left. Let them talk. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. I've spent 20 years running from what I wanted. I'm tired of running. They stayed there in the warm lamplight, hands clasped across the table until the clock struck 11. When Benjamin finally stood to leave, Penelope walked him to the door. On the threshold, he turned back. Can I see you again? Maybe take you to dinner tomorrow evening. The hotel dining room serves a decent roast on Saturday nights, Penelope heard herself say. His smile transformed his entire face, bringing back glimpses of the young man she'd loved. I'll call for you at 6. After he left, Penelope leaned against the closed door, her mind spinning. She'd built such a careful life after Thomas died, running her store, attending church, playing with her grandchildren when they visited. Safe and predictable and completely without risk. But safety had never made her pulse race like this. Predictability had never made her feel alive in quite this way. She went to bed, but didn't sleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about second chances, and whether hearts could heal from 2 decades of silence. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Penelope helped customers, restocked shelves, and tried not to watch the clock. Word had apparently spread about Benjamin's return because no fewer than 4 women found excuses to come into the store and casually mention they'd heard he was back in town. Such a shame what happened to him during the war, Mrs. Henderson said, examining a bolt of calico with entirely too much interest. I heard he was never quite right after. That's what John said anyway. Penelope kept her face neutral. People change in 20 years, Martha. We all do. Still, you should be careful, dear. You have a reputation to think about. I appreciate your concern. Penelope's tone made it clear the conversation was over. By the time she closed the store at 5, her nerves were jangling. She hurried home and changed into her best dress, a deep burgundy with black trim that Thomas had always said brought out the color in her cheeks. She pinned her hair up carefully, noting the silver threads that hadn't been there when Benjamin left. Would he see her as old now, faded? But when he arrived at 6 sharp, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his eyes held nothing but admiration. You look beautiful, he said simply. You clean up pretty well yourself." She took his offered arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric. They walked through town toward the Paisano Hotel as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. People stared, some nodding politely, others whispering behind their hands. Penelope lifted her chin and ignored them all. The dining room was half full, mostly travelers passing through on their way to El Paso or beyond. They found a corner table with a view of the mountains in the distance. Benjamin ordered for both of them, remembering without asking that she preferred her coffee black and liked cornbread with honey. "You remembered," she said, touched. "I remember everything about you, Penny, every single thing." Over dinner, they talked about the years between. She told him about her children, Michael and Sarah, both grown now with families of their own. About how Thomas had been steady and kind, a good father and a decent husband, even if her heart had never belonged to him entirely. About building the store into something profitable, becoming someone the town respected. Benjamin told her about Montana, about learning to work cattle in weather so cold your spit froze before it hit the ground. About the mountains there, so different from the desert landscape of West Texas. About slowly, painfully learning to sleep through the night again, to not flinch at sudden noises, to trust that he deserved to be alive when so many others had died. The first few years after the war were the hardest, he admitted, pushing food around his plate. "I drank too much, fought too much, couldn't hold down work. Finally ended up on that ranch in Montana because the owner was a veteran himself, understood what I was going through. He gave me a chance when no one else would. Taught me that work could be healing, that putting your hands to something good could help quiet the demons." "I wish I could have been there," Penelope said softly. "I wish I could have helped you through it. You did, in a way. When things got really dark, I'd think about you. About dancing with you at the Harvest Festival. About how you laughed, this full-throated sound that made everyone around you smile. Those memories kept me going more than once." He looked at her intently. "Did you love him? Thomas?" The question hung between them, heavy with import. Penelope considered lying, but Benjamin deserved the truth. "I cared for him deeply. He was good to me, gave me children I love with all my heart, built me a life I'm proud of. But love," she met Benjamin's eyes, "not the way I loved you. Not the kind that burns in your chest and makes you feel like you could take on the whole world. I never felt that again after you left." Benjamin reached across the table and took her hand. "I need you to understand something, Penny. I'm not the same man I was at 23. The war changed me. Made me harder in some ways, softer in others. I still have nightmares sometimes. Sometimes loud noises make me jumpy. I'm not perfect, not by a long shot. I'm not the same girl either," she replied. "I'm 40 years old, Benjamin. I've got silver in my hair and lines around my eyes. I've buried a husband and watched my children grow up and leave. I'm set in my ways, used to running my own life. I'm not some blushing young thing who'll follow you anywhere without question." "Good," he smiled. "I don't want that girl anymore. I want the woman sitting across from me now. The strong, capable woman who built a business and raised a family and survived everything life threw at her. That's who I want, Penny. If you'll have me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "We've been apart for 20 years. We barely know each other anymore. Then let's get to know each other again. I'll court you proper this time, take you to church socials and Sunday dinners. Let the whole town watch us figure this out together." His grip on her hand tightened. "I'm not running anymore. I'm here and I'm staying, whether you want me or not. But I sure hope you want me, because I've wasted 20 years already and I don't want to waste another day." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "You're really staying? Even if I say no? Marfa's my home. Took me 20 years to remember that, but I remember it now." My father's house needs work, but it's got good bones. I've got money saved to fix it up, maybe buy some land. I can make a life here." He paused. "It'd be a better life with you in it, but I'll make it work either way." The restaurant had emptied around them without Penelope noticing. The waiter hovered discreetly near the kitchen, clearly waiting for them to finish. She looked at Benjamin, really looked at him, and saw not the ghost of who he'd been, but the reality of who he was now. A man who'd survived hell and come through the other side. A man who'd learned hard lessons about running and staying. A man who wanted her, not some idealized memory, but her as she was right now. "Take me home," she said. They walked through the cooling evening, their pace slow and unhurried. When they reached her gate, Benjamin stopped. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Instead of answering, Penelope rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a gentle exploration of familiar territory made new by time. Then Benjamin's arms came around her, and she melted into him, remembering and discovering all at once. He kissed like a man who'd waited 20 years for this moment, with reverence and hunger and something that felt achingly like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come to church with me tomorrow," Penelope said. "Let the whole town see we're together. No hiding, no shame." "I'd be honored." True to his word, Benjamin arrived the next morning dressed in his Sunday best. They walked into the white clapboard church together, Penelope's hand tucked into the crook of his elbow. The congregation's collective intake of breath was audible, but Penelope kept her head high. They sat in the pew where she'd sat alone for the past 3 years, and when Reverend Walsh gave the blessing, Benjamin's hand found hers. After the service, they ran the gauntlet of curious townspeople. Most were kind, if clearly shocked. A few were cold, particularly the women who'd set their caps for Benjamin back before the war. But Benjamin stayed close to Penelope's side, making it clear where his loyalties lay. "Well," Mrs. Henderson sniffed as they passed, "I suppose some people just can't let go of the past." "Or maybe," Benjamin said clearly, "some people get a second chance at a future." Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Benjamin worked on his father's house during the day, stripping old wallpaper and replacing broken boards. Penelope ran her store, serving customers and managing inventory. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together, sometimes at the hotel, sometimes at her cottage where she'd cook and he'd help wash dishes. They talked endlessly, filling in 20 years of gaps. She learned about his time in Montana, about friends he'd made and lost, about the woman named Catherine who'd helped him heal. He learned about her marriage, about the challenges of running a business as a woman alone, about her fear that she was too old for this kind of love. "Age is just numbers, Penny," he said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars come out. "What matters is what we do with the time we have left. And what do you want to do with it?" He turned to her, his expression serious. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to help you run your store if you'll let me. I want to meet your children and grandchildren. I want to make up for lost time in every way possible. I want to marry you, Penny, as soon as you'll have me." Her breath caught. "Benjamin, we've only been courting a few weeks. We've known each other our whole lives. We were engaged before. We've already wasted 20 years. He took both her hands in his. "I'm not saying we have to do it tomorrow, but I'm saying I know what I want and I want you. For whatever time we both have left on this earth, I want to spend it loving you." Penelope felt tears stream down her face. "Yes. Yes, you'll marry me. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Penelope was laughing and crying at the same time. "When?" Benjamin asked. "Give me 2 months. I want my children here. I want to do this right." 2 months, he agreed. "I can wait 2 months." Penelope wrote to Michael and Sarah that night, long letters explaining everything. Both responded within weeks, their letters full of cautious support and curiosity about the man their mother had loved before their father. The next 8 weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Penelope worked with the Reverend to arrange the ceremony. She sewed herself a new dress, a beautiful dove gray silk that was appropriate for a widow remarrying but still special enough for the occasion. Benjamin finished work on his father's house, turning it from a decaying relic into a comfortable home with fresh paint and new furniture. They spent every spare moment together, and the town gradually adjusted to seeing them as a couple. Mrs. Henderson even grudgingly admitted they seemed happy, though she still thought it was all a bit sudden. Michael arrived first, a tall man of 22 who looked so much like Thomas, it made Penelope's heart ache. He was cautious with Benjamin at first, protective of his mother's happiness. But over dinner, Benjamin answered his hard questions honestly, never flinching from the difficult truths about where he'd been and why he'd stayed away. "I can't change the past," Benjamin told him. "I can only promise I'll spend the rest of my life making your mother happy." "That's all I want," Michael said finally, extending his hand. Sarah arrived 2 days later with her husband and baby daughter. At 19, she was romantic and thrilled by the idea of her mother reuniting with a lost love. She peppered Benjamin with questions about the old days, wanting to know every detail of how he'd courted her mother. "Your mama was the prettiest girl in 3 counties," Benjamin told her, his eyes on Penelope. "But that's not why I loved her. I loved her because she was fearless. Because she spoke her mind and stood up for what was right. Because she made me want to be better than I was." The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in early October 1885, when the brutal summer heat had finally broken, and the air held a hint of autumn crispness. Penelope walked down the church aisle on Michael's arm, with Sarah standing up as matron of honor. Benjamin stood at the altar looking nervous and happy and impossibly handsome in a new suit. Reverend Walsh kept the ceremony simple and dignified. When Benjamin slid the gold ring onto Penelope's finger, his hands trembled. When she did the same for him, tears streaked down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Walsh said with a smile. "Benjamin, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was chaste and brief, appropriate for a church full of witnesses, but it held the promise of everything to come. The congregation applauded, and Penelope found herself laughing as Benjamin swept her back down the aisle. They held a small reception at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Benjamin waltzed Penelope around the floor while the whole town watched, and she felt like a girl again, young and in love and full of possibilities. "Happy," Benjamin murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." That night, they went to the house Benjamin had renovated, the house that was now theirs together. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the old-fashioned gesture. Inside, he'd lit lamps throughout, casting everything in warm, golden light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said. "It feels strange having a new name again," Penelope admitted. "You'll always be my Penny no matter what name you carry." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you. I've loved you since we were children. I loved you through the war and the years after. I loved you even when I thought I'd never see you again, and I'll love you until the day I die." "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped, even when I thought I should. Even when I married Thomas and tried to build a different life. Part of my heart was always yours." They moved together slowly, rediscovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Making love at 40 was different than it would have been at 20, slower and more intentional, marked by the knowledge that time was precious and not to be wasted. They took their time, savoring every touch, every kiss, every moment of connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Penelope's head on Benjamin's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "No nightmares tonight," he murmured. "Not with you here." "I'll always be here," she promised. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Penelope continued running her store, with Benjamin helping with heavy lifting and deliveries. He proved to have a good head for business, suggesting inventory changes that increased profits. In the evenings, they'd close up shop and walk home together, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Michael and Sarah visited regularly, bringing the grandchildren. Benjamin was wonderful with the babies, patient and gentle in a way that surprised everyone who remembered the wild young man he'd been before the war. Watching him rock Sarah's daughter to sleep, Penelope felt her heart swell with love. "I wish we'd had children together," she said one night as they prepared for bed. Benjamin looked up from unbuttoning his shirt. "We still could." "I'm 40 years old, Benjamin, past childbearing age. Maybe, maybe not. And even if we don't have babies of our own, we have Michael and Sarah and their children. We have this life we're building together. That's more than enough for me." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "You're more than enough for me, Penny. You always have been." As it turned out, they were both wrong about one thing. 4 months after the wedding, Penelope started feeling queasy in the mornings. At first, she assumed it was something she ate, but when it continued for weeks, she visited the doctor in Fort Davis. "Congratulations, Mrs. Irwin, doctor," Patterson said with a smile. "You're going to have a baby." Penelope sat in stunned silence, her hand going to her still flat stomach. "But I'm 40 years old. I thought it was impossible." "Unlikely, perhaps, but clearly not impossible. You're healthy and strong. I see no reason you can't carry this baby to term, though we'll want to monitor you carefully given your age." She walked home in a daze, her mind spinning. A baby. She and Benjamin were going to have a baby together. Part of her was terrified, remembering how difficult her pregnancies had been with Michael and Sarah. But another part was thrilled at this unexpected gift, this chance to create life with the man she'd always loved. Benjamin was in the barn behind the house, fixing a broken stall door. Penelope stood in the doorway watching him work, gathering her courage. "Benjamin," she said. He looked up, immediately seeing something in her face. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant." The hammer fell from his hand and clattered on the floor. "You're what? Pregnant?" "I saw the doctor in Fort Davis today. He says I'm about 2 months along." Benjamin crossed to her in 3 long strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle. "We're having a baby. Penny, we're having a baby," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Are you happy?" "I know we didn't plan this." "Happy?" He set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "Penny, I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We're going to have a child together. After everything we've been through, we get this gift." That night, they lay in bed with Benjamin's hand splayed across her stomach, marveling at the miracle growing inside her. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "I don't know. With Michael and Sarah, I was so sick all the time. This feels different." "I hope it's a girl," Benjamin said. "A little girl with your eyes and your spirit." "I hope it's a boy," Penelope countered. "A son with your strength and your heart." As it turned out, they were both wrong again. Penelope's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite her age. She continued working in the store until she was 7 months along, at which point Benjamin insisted she rest more. The town rallied around them, excited about the coming baby. Even Mrs. Henderson softened, bringing by tiny sweaters she'd knitted. On a warm night in early June 1886, Penelope went into labor. The midwife came, along with Sarah, who'd arrived 2 weeks earlier to help. Benjamin paced in the kitchen, drinking coffee and wearing a hole in the floor. When the baby's cry finally rang out, he rushed to the bedroom door. "It's a boy," Sarah called out. A big, healthy boy. Benjamin entered to find Penelope exhausted but glowing, a tiny bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said. He approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant. "He's perfect." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. They discussed names for months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Benjamin said, "James. After my brother who died in the war, James Robert Irwin." "James Robert," Penelope repeated. "It's perfect." The next months were exhausting and wonderful. Penelope had forgotten how demanding infants were, but Benjamin proved to be a devoted father. He'd wake in the night to bring James to Penelope for feeding, then walk the floor with him afterward. He'd change diapers without complaint and sing off-key lullabies that somehow always worked. "You're good at this," Penelope told him one evening as she watched him rock James to sleep. "I've got 20 years to make up for," Benjamin replied. "With you and with life, I'm not wasting a single moment." James grew from infant to toddler, a sturdy little boy with Benjamin's blue eyes and Penelope's stubborn streak. Michael and Sarah adored their baby brother, visiting often and bringing their own growing families. The house that had felt too big when Benjamin first renovated it now rang with laughter and children's voices. The store continued to thrive, with Benjamin taking on more responsibilities as Penelope focused on raising James. They made a good team, balancing business and family with practiced ease. In the evenings after James was in bed, they'd sit on the porch and watch the stars, content in the life they'd built. "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked one night. "The years we lost," Penelope considered the question carefully. "I regret that we didn't have more time together. But I can't regret the life I had with Thomas or the children I had with him. They're part of who I am. And maybe we needed those 20 years apart to become the people we are now, the people who could build this life together." That's a generous way of looking at it. It's the only way that makes sense. We can't change the past, Benjamin. We can only live in the present and hope for the future. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then I hope for many more years like this. Growing old with you, watching James grow up, being surrounded by family and love." "That sounds perfect," Penelope murmured. The years rolled by with surprising swiftness. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the store and loved helping his father. He'd ride on Benjamin's shoulders through town, waving at everyone they passed. The town, which had been so scandalized by Benjamin and Penelope's reunion, now saw them as pillars of the community. When James was 5, Penelope realized she was pregnant again. This time, the shock was even greater. "We're having another baby," Benjamin said incredulously. "At our age, apparently so." Penelope laughed at his expression. "We make babies easily, it seems." This pregnancy was harder than the last. At 45, Penelope felt every ache and pain more acutely. Dr. Patterson monitored her carefully, warning her to rest as much as possible. Benjamin fretted constantly, hovering over her until she finally shooed him away. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said. "Go run the store and let me have some peace." The baby, another boy they named Thomas after her late husband, arrived in January 1891. He was smaller than James had been, but healthy and strong. Benjamin cried when he held him, overwhelmed by the gift of a second child so late in life. "2 sons," he said wonderingly. "We have 2 sons, Penny." "We do." She smiled tiredly. "Our family's complete now." Raising 2 boys while running a business and managing a household kept them both busy, but they made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the boys were asleep or occupied. Their love had deepened over the years. mellowing from the passionate intensity of youth into something richer and more enduring. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Penelope with a trip to El Paso. They left the boys with Sarah and her husband and took the train east, staying in a fancy hotel and eating in restaurants that served food they couldn't pronounce. "This is wonderful," Penelope said as they walked through the city streets. "But you know what I realized?" "What's that?" "I miss home. I miss Marfa and our house and the boys. I miss our normal life." Benjamin grinned. "Me too. But it's nice to get away sometimes. Remember that we're not just parents and business owners. We're still Benjamin and Penelope, the kids who fell in love back before the world got complicated." They stood on the hotel balcony that night, looking out over the city lights. Penelope leaned back against Benjamin's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "If you could go back," she asked, "and change what happened, would you? You mean if I could make it so I never went to war, never disappeared, never put you through all that pain?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "The selfish part of me says yes. But the honest part knows that everything we went through made us who we are, made us appreciate what we have now. So no, I wouldn't change it. I'd live through it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "I love you," Penelope whispered. "I love you too, Penny. Always have, always will." They returned home to find James and Thomas had been perfect angels for their aunt, a claim Sarah admitted was a slight exaggeration. The boys had missed them terribly and clung to both parents for days afterward. Life returned to its comfortable rhythm of work and family, of small joys and shared responsibilities. Michael established himself as a successful lawyer in El Paso, visiting regularly with his wife and 3 children. Sarah and her husband bought a ranch outside Marfa, raising cattle and 5 rambunctious kids. The house Benjamin and Penelope shared became the center of family gatherings, full of noise and laughter and love. As the years passed, they watched James and Thomas grow into fine young men. James inherited his father's love of hard work and his mother's head for business, eventually taking over much of the store's operations. Thomas proved to be a natural with horses, spending his teenage years working at Sarah's ranch and dreaming of having land of his own. Benjamin's hair went from dark brown to steel gray to white. Penelope's face gained more lines, her hands more accustomed to hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they'd been, still felt that same spark of connection. On the 20th anniversary of Benjamin's return to Marfa, they hosted a party at the house. The whole town came, along with family from near and far. As the sun set and the party wound down, Benjamin and Penelope slipped away to the porch, watching the familiar desert landscape turn purple and gold. 20 years, Penelope marveled. "It doesn't seem possible." "Best 20 years of my life," Benjamin said. "Though I wish we'd had 20 more before them. We have more to come." She squeezed his hand. "Plenty more." They did have more years, blessed years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They watched James marry a sweet girl from Fort Davis and give them 3 grandchildren. They watched Thomas buy his own ranch and marry Sarah's former nanny, starting a family of his own. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned the friends they lost to age and illness, and held tight to each other through it all. In the spring of 1910, when Penelope was 65 and Benjamin was 68, they took a rare day off from the store to ride out into the desert they both loved. They packed a lunch and rode to a spot near where they used to meet as young people, under the shade of a cottonwood tree that had somehow survived decades of drought. "I kissed you under this tree," Benjamin said, helping Penelope down from her horse. "Summer of 1864. You were wearing a blue dress and your hair was down. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." I remember. Penelope touched the tree's rough bark. I thought you were so brave going off to fight. I was terrified I'd never see you again. You almost didn't, but I did. That's what matters. She turned to face him. We found our way back to each other. Against all odds, despite 20 years and everything that tried to keep us apart, we found our way home. Benjamin pulled her into his arms, and they stood there under the cottonwood tree, holding each other the way they had when they were young. But this embrace held so much more than that first one had, weighted with shared history and hard-won wisdom, and a love that had survived everything life could throw at it. "I'd do it all again," Benjamin murmured. "Every hard year, every moment of pain, every mile I traveled if it meant finding my way back to you." "Me too," Penelope said. "All of it, because it brought us here." They spread their blanket and ate lunch in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the endless Texas sky. Later, they'd ride home to the life they'd built, to the children and grandchildren and business that filled their days. But for now, they simply existed together, two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again, who'd learned that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that take the long way around. As they rode back toward Marfa in the golden afternoon light, Penelope looked at the town spread out before them, the little collection of buildings that had been home to so much joy and sorrow and everything in between. The place where she'd said goodbye to a boy going off to war and hello to a man finally coming home. The place where they'd rebuilt what was broken and created something new and beautiful from the pieces. "Happy?" Benjamin asked, the question he'd asked so many times over the years. Penelope smiled, her hand reaching across to clasp his. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." They rode into Marfa together, two aging lovers on horseback, heading home to the life they'd fought so hard to build. Behind them, the sun set over the desert in a blaze of orange and red, painting the sky with promises of tomorrow. Ahead of them lay their house, their family, their future together, however long it might last. And in the space between past and future, in the golden present moment, Benjamin and Penelope rode side by side, hands clasped, hearts entwined, finally and forever home.